Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. You're watching a recorded session on the UK government's COVID-19 recovery strategy webinar delivered by Tim Thomas and Alice Tranter from our skills and policy team. I'm conscious there's been a raft of announcements over the last few days. Currently, we're at the 13th of May. There's been a raft of announcements, so I'm delighted to say that Tim and Alice are on hand here to unpick the latest announcements to find out what it means for you and for your business. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Alice, who can take you through the first part of today's session.
Thanks, Roger. Yes, as Roger just said, there's been quite a few announcements the past couple of days. Most known is sort of the government's return to a certain normality phased approach. And then yesterday, the Chancellor updated us on a further extension to the coronavirus job retention scheme. But for now, let's just go through the current situation and how government are going to move us slowly onwards from here. So, latest figures. There are no regions of the country where the epidemic appears to be increasing, which is good. So Boris Johnson said last week, we are past the peak now. As of the 9th of May, it is estimated that 136,000 people in England are currently infected with COVID-19, and the number of patients in hospital in the UK with COVID-19 is under 13,500 as of the 4th of May. So this is 35% below the peak on 12th of April, which is fantastic progress. 27% of NHS critical care beds in the UK were occupied by a COVID-19 patient on the 4th of May, compared to 51% on the 10th of April. So that's brilliant. We've really gone down by at least half. And the number of deaths so far this year is 37,151, higher than the average for 2015 to 2019. So there we go. Right, we've all heard about R. It's now down to R's, which is a rate of infection, the transmission rate. And this had seen an uptick in care homes and hospitals over the past week. So tragically, the number of COVID-19 care home deaths has now been registered up to the 24th of April is 6,934. Public Health England had commissioned a review into factors affecting the health outcomes from COVID-19. This should be published at the end of the month this year, end of May. So the R, rate of infection, is now below 1. It's roughly between 0.5 and 0.9, but potentially only just below 1, which means the real challenges remain on the operational support required for managing the virus because it's so precarious. And as we might have heard from the Prime Minister's statement last weekend, the government's not quite yet confident that any major adjustments now will not risk a second peak of infections that might overwhelm the NHS and could be even worse than the wave we've had initially. So different parts of the UK have different R figures. The devolved administrations are making their own assessments about the lifting of measures in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. However, what we know is that England, we really must contain the R, and it must remain below 1, otherwise we risk that second wave. So challenges ahead. We've been through the peak. Now it's about, what do we need to navigate going forward? When will we return to normality? Well, there's no set answer to this, but we can look at the government's timetable and their phases and how we as a country can sort of help each other get back to a recognised normality. So as we all know, this is not a short-term crisis. It is likely that COVID-19 will circulate in the human population long-term, possibly causing periodic epidemics. We don't know, but it is plausible. And therefore, fully opening schools or relaxing all social distancing measures now will lead to a resurgence of the virus and a second wave that could be larger than the first, as I was explaining on the previous slide. So the country must get the number of new cases down. Holding R below 1 will reduce the number of new cases down to a level that allows for the effective tracing of new cases. That's why it's so vital. And this is a significant part of the next phase of the government's response, which is to improve the monitoring of and response to new infections. So we might have a track and trace program with a newly developed NHS app. So the government's aim at the centre of their plan is to return to life as close to normal as possible for as many people as possible and as fast and as fairly as possible. So big steps ahead. So the phases that I was just briefly mentioning, the government's got 3. We're in the first phase now, sort of beyond that, and I'm going to talk you through phase 2 and phase 3. So phase 2, this is where the government has sought to contain, delay, research, and mitigate. It will move through the 2 phases. So this is containing the virus, delaying the spread, researching on its infection rate and how to mitigate the outcome of these things. So that's what we've been doing in this present time, March-April period. So over time, the government are going to be introducing more reactive and localized measures through the widespread accurate monitoring of the disease. So that's local authorities reporting back from local hospitals in that sense. There's been a really big announcement on health and safety, and the government have released health and safety guidance for the workplace as of yesterday, 12th of May. And this is very important for all employers to read and adhere to, and my colleague Tim will talk you through most of that at the other half of the webinar. And the government also anticipate targeting future restrictions more precisely than at present where possible. So things will change gradually. And an example they've provided is relaxing measures in parts of the country that are lower risk, but continuing them in higher risk locations when the data suggests this is warranted. So, for example, London's got a higher rate, much higher than somewhere in West Sussex. So you could see some different measures being lifted there. Phase 3, this is pretty much, let's try and get a vaccine. The government is investing in research all the time to develop vaccine. It's a global effort. There are currently over 70 credible vaccine development programs worldwide. And amazingly, the first UK human trial has begun at the University of Oxford. However, even if it isn't possible to develop an effective vaccine, there is much possibility that we can develop drug treatments to reduce the impact of contracting COVID-19, which again will be fantastic. And also the economic and societal benefits of success mean the government will do all it can to develop and roll out both treatments and vaccines at the fastest possible rate. It's just that the second phase is a means of managing things until the UK reaches this point. So phase 3 could be sooner or later, we don't know. But we do know is that research is working at pace to develop either drug treatments or a vaccine. So the timetable, this is what the Prime Minister set out in the House of Commons on Monday. He's put certain dates in, and then we've got sort of month by month changes, which should help us. So, lifting the restrictions. Step 1 applies from 13th of May. And this is workers should continue to work from home rather than their normal physical workplace wherever possible. So this has not changed. This has been a rule since March the 20th. If you can't work from home, go to work. If you can, work from home. This coughs up lots of problems, but I'll cover them later. So all workers who cannot work from home should travel to work if a workplace is open. And I think the Prime Minister really called out the manufacturing sector and construction, places where obviously an office is not your normal workspace, therefore working at home is impossible. And the sectors of the economy that are allowed to be open and should be open include the food production, construction, manufacturing, logistics, distribution and scientific research and laboratories, to name a few. If you check on the government website, they list them all. So as I was saying with health and safety, workplaces are now to follow the new COVID-19 secure guidelines published 12th of May as well. We'll go through that later. And then more vulnerable children and children of critical workers or key workers should be urged to attend school in person, not to do it virtually like everyone else, but to actually go into the schools. And then also The government will later clarify that paid childcare, such as nannies or private childminders, can take place subject to being able to meet the public health principles, because obviously those workers can't work from home. And this would help those working.
Alice, just on that slide, and just before you go on, I imagine there's a lot of employers and employees actually concerned about the balance and the trade-off between getting people back to work and back to normality, but the fact that there's a school timetable return to normality as well, and that sort of, I think, not until the 1st of June, isn't it, as well? So how do we balance that sort of situation?
That's a really good question, Roger, because it's going to affect huge amounts of people. Because if you are encouraged to go back to work, let's say in the manufacturing sector, but you've got kids at home, then you can't. It's really, really difficult. You've got to juggle your childcare duties and your work duties. Therefore, we encourage employers to be as understanding as possible and to incorporate flexible working. Now, flexible working is vital in these unique situations where you do have people who will be unwell, or they've got to care for vulnerable relatives, or like you just said, they've got kids at home who can't yet go to school until the 1st of June. So employers really have to sort of restructure the way the company is and say, right, okay, you can be flexible working, you can do these hours or these hours, just to allow you to obviously look after the kids at the same time, work from home if you can. However, a lot of people do have kids and they can't work from home because their job's not behind a computer or whether it is, then, and this is not obviously the first option, then an employer has the option to continue to furlough them, because now we know the scheme has been announced. So there's still certain options there, but we'd really, really encourage all places to incorporate flexible working, where the employee and the employer can discuss what shift works best for them, what hours work best for them, how would they feel supported, and their needs addressed best.
Okay, thanks, Alice. Cheers.
Just continuing with step one. So step one's a big step. So this is obviously from the 13th of May. So everybody, including critical workers, should continue to avoid public transport wherever possible. So that's buses, trains, tube, whichever it is. If you can drive, if you can cycle, if you can walk, the government has been very strong on this. Please do that instead of taking public transport, only when it's not possible. So, for example, if you do take public transport because there's no other way of getting work, you must follow social distancing guidance rigorously. That includes government advice is now saying to wear a face covering in closed spaces, again on public transport and now in shops. So the guidance is now, if you're going shopping for Sainsbury's, whatever it is, you should be wearing a face covering. So clinically vulnerable people should continue to take particular care to minimise contact with others outside their household. This is advisory because according to government guidance, they do not need to be shielded. They're just clinically vulnerable. They just need to manage their risks themselves. The government now will impose higher fines to reflect the increased risk to others of breaking the rules as people are returning to work and school. So if you're not respecting social distancing measures, there is a chance that you could have a higher fine. As we've probably heard over the past few days, anyone arriving into the UK, so all international arrivals, they will need to be supplying their contact and accommodation information now, and they will need to be downloading that NHS contact tracing app as well, so we can sort of track and trace them to see if they were affected. Further, all international arrivals, not on a short list of exemptions, are required now to self-isolate in their accommodation for 14 days upon arrival into the UK, which has been announced this week. The exemptions include the EU Common Travel Area, I believe, and sort of security things as well, government officials. But for everyone else, they'll have to self-isolate 14 days when they come to the UK. So step two, this is looking ahead next month now. So this is further lifting of restrictions. This applies from the 1st of June. And as Roger just mentioned, it's sort of when the younger kids can go back. So what the government plans to do is a phased return for early years settings and schools. So that's community nurseries. Schools should prepare to begin to open for more children from the 1st of June. And more children includes reception, year 1 and year 6. Year 6 is when you do the 11 plus, before you go to secondary school, so they need to be back in school, in smaller sizes. And then unfortunately, secondary schools and further education colleges shouldn't expect to go back to school in a regular way before September. However, they should also prepare to have some face-to-face contact alongside year 10 and year 12 with their teachers for a little bit as well. So further down the line, opening non-essential retail when and where it's safe to do so. This could include garden centres, clothes shops, and IKEA, whatever it is. Permitting cultural and sporting events to take place behind closed doors for broadcast, and reopening more local public transport in urban areas, subject to strict measures. So this will be quite a big shift. If kids can go back to school, we might see some people go back to work a bit more. This again is some gradual easing of lockdown measures. And then finally, step 3, which is July time, applies from 4th of July. We can open at least some of the remaining businesses and premises that have been required to close. And these include, as we're all very aware, personal care such as hairdressers and beauty salons, hospitality such as food service providers, pubs and accommodation, public places such as places of worship, leisure facilities like cinemas. And the government has said, in order to facilitate as fast as possible reopening of these types of higher risk businesses and public places, they will carefully phase and pilot reopenings to test viability to see if they are adopting to the new COVID-19 secured guidelines safely enough. So hopefully, if everything works well before, we'll see by the 4th of July, this new phase 3 where public businesses can open again. So workforce management. So we've talked about current situation, the phases, the timetable, the fact that government really wants us to start returning to work where we can, where it's safe to do so, if you cannot work from home. And that requires employers to sort of restructure the workforce slightly, and perhaps it includes shift work or different hours or flexible working, as I mentioned before. So obviously, the biggest thing to do is health and safety and managing and mitigating risk and seeing how you can ensure all your employees are safe at work. So according to the new COVID-19 secure guidelines, the objective of this in the workplace is to reduce the risk to the lowest reasonably practicable level by taking preventative measures in order of priority, which I know all employers will be doing anyway. So as employers know, they have a duty to reduce workplace risk to the lowest reasonably practicable level by taking preventive measures. This means working through the following steps. So in every workplace, increasing the frequency of hand washing and surface cleaning. Businesses and workplaces should make every reasonable effort to enable working from home as a first option, as we've discussed before. And where working from home is not possible, workplaces should make every reasonable effort to comply with the social distancing guidelines set out by the government, which is 2 meters apart wherever possible. Further, managing and mitigating risk. So with social distancing guidelines can't be followed, and this is quite a common question we get in relation to a particular activity, businesses should consider whether that activity needs to continue for that business to operate. So perhaps you need to leave certain operations aside if social distancing can't be adhered to. And therefore, if so, you take all the mitigating actions possible to reduce the risk of transmissions that are between their staff. And again, this is increasing the frequency of hand washing and surface cleaning, keeping the activity time involved as short as possible, and using screens or barriers like we've seen in shops to separate people from each other. And again, if you're working at the same station, it's advised that you use back-to-back or side-to-side working rather than face-to-face whenever it is possible. And of course, reducing the number of people each person has contact with. So I will now pass on to my colleague Tim, He'll take you through the rest of workforce management and changes to the Bella scheme and a bit on employment law. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alice. Tim, you should be able to pick up the presentation now. Just before, Tim, you get going, just a reminder for anyone watching really is that all the stuff that Alice took us through there, and thanks Alice for that walkthrough of all the recent announcements. We'll be updating our FAQs no doubt on our website, and again I'd say the website, particularly the Coronavirus Hub, is a good first port of call really for all the recent updates and announcements that we've just gone through there. Okay, Tim, over to you. Oh, sorry, Tim, I think you're on mute there.
There we go. Thanks, Roger. Thanks, Alice. Let's carry on with the journey and look at what you now do with your risk assessment. Risk assessment is key to the government guidance that Alice was just talking to you about. So what should you do? You should share the results with your workforce, engage with your workforce, and clearly make sure that they have confidence you've conducted the risk assessment correctly and that they're safe to return to work or increase operations if you never actually close down. If possible, think about publishing the results on your website. This is all the guidance that I'm going through from government recently released. It's expected all employees with over 50 workers would do this. And there's also suggested notice in the guidance that you could use. At the end, Roger, we can circulate with this presentation and with the webinar the link to all the guidance for everyone that is listening in. And on your screen there, you see a screenshot of the suggested notice that appears in the guidance, and a link at the end, as you see, to the HSE website as well. So the guidance that government has published specific to manufacturing goes through a number of areas of operations, and I'll just talk you through some of the main areas now. It's a quite extensive guidance together with everything else, so there's no substitute for reading it and applying it to your own individual workplace. But in terms of workstations, the objective is to maintain social distancing between individuals when they're at their individual workstations. So for people that work in one place, workstation should allow them to maintain social distancing wherever this is possible. A workstation should be assigned to an individual as much as is humanly possible. If they need to be shared, then they should be shared by the smallest number of people. If it's not possible to keep the workstations 2 meters apart, then attention needs to be paid to equipment, cleaning, hygiene to reduce the risk. So if you can't keep 2 meters apart, then make sure you assess the risk and mitigate it. Shift patterns and working groups. Well, the objective here is to change the way that work is organized to create distinct groups of people so as to reduce the number of contacts. So the idea is that you have less people in contact with each other and that you maintain individual pods of people who just mix with each other. And as far as possible, work should be split into teams or shift groups, and fixing these teams or shift groups so that there's contact, where contact is unavoidable. This happens between the same group of people. So you can see the idea here, there's only a limited number of people that are coming into contact with each other. So you need to identify areas where people have to directly pass things to each other. This could be job information, spare parts, samples, raw materials. Make sure that you regulate those places to make sure that social distancing applies. And find ways to remove direct contact, such as the use of drop-off points or transfer zones. So we know from speaking to some of our members that they've done this work already, and we know that they've actually implemented changes in the workplace to make sure that the way that parts or information or tools, for example, are passed between people is done in a way that they don't come into direct contact with each other. So work-related travel, big part of the guidance. The objective is to avoid unnecessary work-related travel and keep people safe when they need to travel between locations. So minimize non-essential travel and consider remote working options first. Minimize the number of people traveling together in any one vehicle. Use fixed travel partners, increase ventilation where possible, and avoid sitting face to face. So we know that some of our members, for example, have implemented new rules in the workplace and trained their staff to make sure that when they arrive at the workplace, they arrive individually and not in a collective. Cleaning shared vehicles between shifts or on a handover. And this is part of the general guidance that we must make sure that the workplace is regularly cleaned, and this goes for vehicles. It's any place where people regularly work or congregate. Where workers are required to stay away from their home, centrally logging them and making sure that any overnight accommodation meets social distancing guidelines. So as the economy starts to open up again, a lot of inquiries from Make UK members indicating that their workers are required to travel some distance, need to stay away from home. So make a note of where they're staying and make a note and making sure that those places are compliant with government guidance and get clarification and confirmation of that. So what else is in work-related travel? Well, to help workers delivering to other sites such as factories, logistics sites or customers' premises to maintain social distance and hygiene practices, there are a number of things that government is suggesting that you put in place. This is all guidance. So put in place procedures to minimise person-to-person contact during deliveries with other sites. So some of this has happened already where, for example, deliveries can take place or people can pass through a checkpoint or a gate without actually speaking to someone and without actually winding a window down, for example. Maintain consistent pairing between two-person deliveries. So the same idea that we've heard before in terms of shift organisation, pair people together and make sure they stick together. Minimising contact during payments and exchange of documentation. So many businesses, not just manufacturers, now go into electronic payment methods only, and documents being signed for and exchanged electronically. So there's no direct hard copy that's passed between one person and another. Communication training. So the objective here is to make sure that all workers understand the COVID-19 related safety procedures. So we know from some of our members that have ramped up production, starting to ramp up production, that a large part of this is training and educating their workforce before they ever return to the site. So providing clear, consistent and regular communication to improve the understanding and consistency of the ways that you particularly are working at your site. So some of our members have made sure they communicate, for example, with furlough staff throughout this period, told them what they are doing to prepare the workplace, training them and providing online tools. So when they come back to work, everybody knows what is expected of them. And in addition, they're making sure that they revisit that training because it's very easy to return to the workplace and slip back into old ways. Engage with workers and worker representatives throughout the existing communication routes and explain and agree any changes in working agreements. So if, for example, you have a recognised trade union in your workplace, that would be an obvious route for you to engage with your workforce and make sure that this training and communication is spread and everyone understands what's expected of them. If you don't have a recognised trade union, then you've usually got other means of communicating. You might have a staff forum, for example, or representatives who are elected. Make sure you use those so that everyone is understanding of what is expected of them. The important thing here is that when people return to the workplace, they are confident that it is safe to do so. Develop communication training materials for workers prior to returning to site, especially around new procedures for arrival at work. So this is something we know that manufacturers have done, who are now taking on extra shifts, for example. They've made sure that people know what the processes are for arrival at work, and where that's happened well, there has generally been a high level of compliance with those processes. What else is on communication and training? Make sure all workers are kept up to date with how safety measures have been implemented or updated. So, as I mentioned just now, ongoing engagement with workers is extremely important to make sure that the message keeps getting home. Include your trade union, include your employee reps, and monitor and understand any unforeseen impacts or changes to the working environment. So there's going to have to be new processes in place to make sure people are complying with the rules, and as production changes over time and increases, make sure that the impact of the changes is logged and you take any necessary action. Awareness and focus on the importance of mental health issues at times of uncertainty. So clearly COVID-19, there's been a lot written about the impact of people who are working from home or who are furloughed upon their mental health. Clearly returning to work is going to be another potentially stressful situation for many employees. They might find that's a period of uncertainty. They might be concerned that they're less well protected. This is all about employees making sure that they communicate the changes to their workforce and their staff, and they reassure them that they've taken the necessary steps to make sure that they comply with government guidance, and make sure that that risk assessment is done and people know it's done, and involve your workforce in that. Use simple, clear messaging to explain the guidelines, images and clear language. Use different methods of doing this, but also give consideration for groups for which English may not be their first language. So again, we know from what some businesses have done that they've already designed new flyers, they've designed new posters, they've designed new communication tools, and they've already put those up in their workplaces before the workers come back. And think about the diversity of your workforce and make sure that you provide those not just in English, but any other languages that might be the first language of some of your workforce. Communicating approaches and operational procedures to suppliers, customers and trade bodies to help them adopt signage and share experience. So we know that, for example, all this needs to be implemented in the workplace, that's signage, for example, and changes in operational procedures. You're going to need to think about your supply chain, people that deliver to your site. You can think about agency workers and agencies, for example, that might be supplying workers in the future to you, so they know that the workplace has changed to comply with this guidance. Inbound and outbound goods. So the objective of this part of the guidance from government is to maintain social distancing and avoid surface transmission when goods enter or leave a site, especially in high volume situations, for example, distribution centres and dispatch areas. So we know that much of manufacturing is just in time. We know that there are many deliveries to our member sites every single day, and that is vital to keep the production going and to keep the production line well stocked with the parts and equipment and all the things that our members need to make sure that they can produce. So the guidance here suggests revising pick-up and drop-off points, procedures and signage and markings. So this is going to be a logistical issue that our members are going to have to deal with and make sure that they communicate clearly to those partners that they work with, their supply chain companies, what is required of them. Minimise unnecessary contact at gatehouse security, yards and warehouses. Now this has already been done in some circumstances, where essentially there is no longer any face-to-face contact between gatehouse staff and people delivering. Considering methods to reduce the frequency of deliveries, for example, ordering larger quantities less often. This is a suggestion from government. It might not be desperately practical in the manufacturing context, but it may be possible to reduce the frequency of deliveries by looking at how much you order and how often it is delivered. It's a possibility, but we know from speaking to our members, it may be a difficult ask. Where possible and safe, have single workers load or unload vehicles. The key part of that is where possible and where it is safe. There is other guidance that clearly foresees a situation where there has to be at least 2 people undertaking a particular activity, and that might be for health and safety reasons. There is guidance as to how that activity can be conducted in compliance with the COVID-19 strategy that government has published. So this is, if you can do it with 1 person, risk assess it, and if that's possible, go ahead. If it cannot, it's not an absolute bar on 2 people conducting a role or carrying out a task. And where possible, use the same pairs of people for loads. So again, this is something that, as I touched on the guidance already, this is about making sure that the possibility for transmission is reduced by reducing the number of interactions you have with people in the workplace. So Roger will circulate the link to all that guidance for you after this webinar, and we've got a help section at the end where you can know more. I'm now going to talk about section 44 of the Employment Rights Act, which is something that you may have heard about if you're an HR practitioner dialing into this webinar. This is something you might have seen talked about or read about or communicated to potentially if you are at work and if it's something that has been raised with you already. So employees' rights at work. Now this layers on to existing health and safety law to some considerable extent. Employers, you'll be aware, have an obligation to provide a safe system of work and safe working practices. And this is something that comes from the guidance that's been published recently. There is a heavy health and safety overlay over all the guidance that I've already touched upon. Slight digression, in terms of enforcement, it's clear that the approach of the Health and Safety Executive is going to be supportive of employers, providing employers are taking this guidance on board, providing employers are making every effort to apply the guidance to their workplace. It is like the Health and Safety Executive is going to be supportive of what you're doing. The Health and Safety Executive is going to be far less supportive, as you think about using enforcement measures, if it comes across businesses that are blatantly ignoring the guidance or not trying to apply the guidance at all. So it's important that you take this guidance on board and apply it, and then you're likely to find the Health and Safety Executive far more supportive of what you're doing. But in terms of section 44, this is clearly potentially a stressful and difficult time for workers. They may have been out of the workplace for some time. They may be concerned that if they return to the workplace, is it going to be safe to do so? They may be concerned, are they going to contract the virus? And potentially between worker and employer, they're not always going to see eye to eye over how the employer is responding to the coronavirus crisis. We know from speaking to our members that this has already happened. Our members have been reassuring their workers that they are responding positively and they are putting in place the necessary measures. But it is going to be a point potentially where workers are not going to be completely supportive of what their employers do and maybe questioning of what their employers are doing. Now, a worker can make a complaint to the employer if they feel the employer is requiring them or a colleague to work in unsafe conditions. And clearly there's an overlay here between what we said about the guidance and potentially changes to workforce practices and what workers perceive, whether they are safe or unsafe conditions that they're returning to. Now, in certain circumstances, complaints of this nature qualify as protected disclosures within the meaning of the Employment Rights Act, which I'll discuss in a moment. Now, employers can't legally dismiss a worker or subject a worker to any detriment, for example, disciplinary action, because the worker has made a protected disclosure. So there is clearly an area here which has the potential to develop, where workers potentially feel that the employer is not providing safe working conditions and make a complaint. And the word of warning here is clearly there's an area of law that surrounds this and wraps around this, and employers need to be careful how they deal with these situations.
Tim, sorry, Tim, just before you move on to that next slide, I'm conscious that there'll be a number of employers, our members listening in who will want some sort of practical advice and guidance on how to handle a situation where perhaps an employee doesn't want to return to work because they feel the working conditions are not safe. How, in that situation, what would you advise an employer?
So we have, Roger, at the end, when I hand back to you, we've got a how to help section, and we've got an extensive set of frequently asked questions on our website. There's another iteration that will be going on the website today following the guidance that we've just been taking everyone through. And within that guidance, there are extensive tips for members and guidance on how you deal with that sort of situation where someone does not feel it is safe to return to work. If you're in any doubt, having looked at the FAQs, I think the best thing we can, Roger, is actually signpost people to the exact FAQs that deal with this. The answer is seek advice from Make UK or another advisor, because clearly, as workers return to the workplace, this has the potential to be an issue that's raised with employers. From the last slide and the slide on your screen now, you will see this can be a complex area of law, and employers need to be sympathetic to workers who say that they don't believe it is yet safe to return to the workplace. I know from speaking to some members that what they've tried is persuade and reassure those workers that they have put in place all the mitigating measures I've been describing and provided the information and trained their workers before they return to the workplace. So that broadly is our advice. Make sure that you take on board the guidance, change the workplace where you need to change it, reassure, advise, train, and then ask the workers to come back. And then that mitigates against the situations that you've been describing, Roger. But ultimately, clearly there will be situations where employees need to go further. The answer, I think, Roger, is look at our FAQs and take advice.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Cheers for that.
I mentioned the protected disclosure issue, and that this will be familiar to many HR practitioners. The qualifications on protected disclosures and whistleblowing, they can be quite technical. Broadly, a very, very high-level outline on the screen before you. So workers have the right to make a protected disclosure or whistleblowing disclosure in certain circumstances. It must be a disclosure of information as opposed to opinion. It must be in the public interest. It must tend to show a breach or likely breach of a legal obligation. And in this context, that could include a legal obligation, as I've indicated already, to provide a safe system work and safe working environment. And the disclosure must be made in the right way to an employer or a responsible person. So if there's something you're concerned about, whether you need to know more, please look at the links at the end when I hand back to Roger, and you will see plenty of information that Make UK is providing to help you and guide you through this process. So I'm now going to cover the further extension to the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme, otherwise known as the furlough scheme. And if you've been following Make UK webinars, you'll see that we have followed every twist and turn, and that the CJRS has been through many different changes over time. So a quick recap, it's going to continue until the end of October, so it's been extended again. Furlough workers across the UK continue to receive 80% of their salary, capped at £2,500, no change there. New flexibility will be introduced from August to get employees back to work and boost the economy. So now we're moving from a stage, as Alice indicated, where we're fighting the coronavirus there is still a job of work to be done. However, government's clearly wanting to move the conversation on and encourage people to come back to work and encourage the economy to get back to the new normal, whatever that is going to be for the rest of this year. And so from the start of August, furlough workers will be able to return to work part-time. That's something Make UK has long been calling for, with employers being asked to pay a percentage towards the salaries of their furloughed staff. So the indication here is that the costs of the furlough scheme, which are considerable, in the future will be shared between government and employers who have furloughed their staff and bringing them back to work. Clearly, bringing employees back to work part-time will automatically reduce the cost of the scheme to government. The employer payments will substitute the contribution that government is currently making, so ensuring that staff continue to receive the 80% of their salary, capped at £2,500 a month. And what that means is this: the indication is that government will reduce the level of support below 80%, and that the gap between that reduced level of support and the 80%, it will look to employers to make sure that they make up that shortfall. The effect on staff workers, therefore, is they continue to receive the 80%. It's just that government doesn't pay all of that themselves. The scheme will continue its current form until the end of July, and we're expecting more specific details and information around its implementation and the changes I've indicated to be available by the end of this month. And at that point, Roger, I think I'm going to hand back to you to wrap up and signpost everyone to where they can go for further information from Make UK.
Excellent. Thanks very much. Look, thanks, Tim, for taking us through that tour, really, of all the announcements that happened this week. And thanks again, Alice, for your part earlier on. As Tim mentioned, a lot of the links that we discussed are there on the screen. So first of all, we have the Coronavirus Hub, which is on our website. Look out certainly for the e-alerts or emails that go out to our member community, sort of updating on the most recent changes. There's a number of different online training modules now which can be delivered virtually. Again, I'd encourage you to look on our website for a whole host of those. Again, really popular, but the HR advice and guidance packages and templates from templates, letters and forms and checklists are all housed on our website. Members are finding that particularly useful. And I mentioned about the business support pack as well, and the link to that business support pack as well, which will be very useful, no doubt, to many of our members. And again, there's a COVID-19 email address there if you wish to feed into the work and the activity that's going on with government. Please do encourage us to make contact with that inbox there. I think that's just about it, Tim. And Alice, thanks very much for your time. All the links again on screen now can be found on the coronavirus homepage. And wish you all the best and hope everyone stays safe. Thank you.